Have you ever wondered what makes a $1 million instrument so special? Does it really mean that the higher price tag is a better sound? And could you tell the difference between a cheaper violin and a more expensive violin? Well, today we're going to be finding out. I'm Sumina Studer, your host for the Tonebase Violin YouTube channel, and today we're going to be comparing 3 different violins at 3 drastically different price points. I cannot wait. Let's dive right in. Today's video has been made possible with the generous help of Florian Leonhard Fine Violins, the leading expert and instrument dealership for stringed instruments. Thank you to Florian for making this video possible today. We're about to dive into the instruments. I'm already very eager to show you which ones we picked. Now, in the meantime, be sure to comment below and let me know which instrument you think sounds best. And be sure to subscribe for more violin-related videos. Now, let's get to the instruments, shall we? All right, before we start actually playing, let's have a little look at these instruments that I have in front of me right now. We got a Prosper Colas right here, we got a Presenda right here, and then we got a Joseph Galliano right here. There are many, many different factors that will price an instrument the way that they are. It's not just which one sounds better and that one is the most expensive. We will go into more detail on these instruments later with my colleague and friend Tom Way, who's the head of sales here at Florian Leonhard. But I can tell you right now, some of the factors that make the instruments the prices that they are is condition, age, rarity, and craftsmanship. So of course, if an instrument is a Stradivarius but it's in bad condition, it'll be a cheaper Stradivarius, if you will. Now, these instruments are all in fair and comparable condition, which makes it a good comparison for this video. And if you ask me, I think we're ready to compare them by playing. So, follow me. I'm joined right now by my colleague and friend, Tom Way, who is the head of sales here at Florian Leonhard Fine Violins, actually. Tom here has over 20 years of experience in this industry, valuing instruments, and has seen everything under the sun. Thank you so much for being here today, Tom.
It's my pleasure, Sumina.
To kick things off, I wanted to ask you the burning question I think that many people have, which is, does price equal the sound quality?
In short, maybe. So there are certain correlations and you have tendencies. So to make something very precisely, that takes human effort. It doesn't matter if this was 400 years ago or today. To find the right materials, it costs money. You have multiple factors, and each one needs to be correct or a certain way for you to have a violin that sounds good. The rarity and the difficulty with which you're going to be able to combine these aspects is what ultimately produces the price, and therefore there is this correlation. Having said that, the sort of discovery of these aspects takes time. So if we're looking at old Cremonese instruments, for example, or old Italian instruments, then it's not that all old Italian instruments are wonderful sounding, but by the time we have sort of put them through their paces, through hundreds of years of testing, we know the ones that work. And because everybody knows this, there is an increase in value. With more modern instruments, that the discovery process is still an ongoing one. That's at least, in a nutshell, how I would put it.
So in short, it really is just a case-by-case scenario, isn't it?
It is case by case. Of course, beauty is in the eye of the beholder or the ear of the beholder, as it is with an instrument. But you can't, it's not potluck, let's say. A great maker has significant control over what happens, in the same way a great player is going to be more consistent. You know, maybe you get really lucky and you have a perfect performance, but without incredible numbers of hours of practice and hard work, that chance is really quite low. So violins is similar in that way.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about maker reputation versus condition of an instrument and how those factors actually influence the pricing of an instrument?
Of course. Again, it does depend on the individual instrument. The older something is, the less likely it is that it's going to be in great condition. And depending on the value of the instrument, we can also look at condition relative to the amount of work that is needed to bring this instrument back to, first of all, a secure state, and secondly, perhaps an aesthetically pleasing state.
Can you actually give us an example? For example, a Stradivarius or something like that?
With Stradivarius, the condition is of utmost importance, because these are collectibles not only because of their amazing sound, but because of their historical significance and artistic significance. This puts them in a slightly different category to some other instruments. So if I have an old Klotz school violin, an old German violin, and the value is, say, between $10,000 and $30,000, I may not actually worry too much about the condition and how it relates to the price. I will worry about the condition and how it relates to the usability. And so in one case, a crack the crack in the wrong place on a Strad could knock $5 million off its value. And in the other, you could have a German violin. I keep saying German, nothing against the Germans, it's just because they're nice and old, and I only want a nice old sound, and I don't care about the condition, because I'm just looking for that sound, and that sound doesn't exist, say, in a modern violin. So in that instance, condition doesn't really matter, and in fact it may even enhance what I want, because it has that old, woody sound. In our lives, we experience aging in many different ways. With music, I suppose most people will have heard a honky-tonk piano in an old bar. That sounds very different to a brand new Steinway concert grand. With wine, age makes a difference. With cheese, with food, very often. With people as well. The way we perceive things and the way things mature is genuine. It exists. You cannot ignore it. With violins, there is a warmth, and occasionally, not always. These are very broad generalizations, sure. But you can see a increase in the ability to produce nuance in the sound. So people talk about color within a violin, and some people hear color and other people don't. But if you do, then there will be certain sounds that only an older violin, given a load of other constraints, can produce. So that is the reason we think about age as something that we want. I would say it tends to be because it gives you the possibility of certain types of color, and that, depending on the music that you're making and the type of career you have, may be the most important thing. However, it may not. If you are playing a concerto, for example, having a amazingly colorful violin with no projection is pointless, right? Because at that point you're thinking, well, no one's going to hear me. So I would say depends case by case, depends on what kind of music the person is trying to make and the type of performances that they are undertaking.
Some modern violins actually can have quite a bit of color as well. It really is in the ear of the beholder, as Tom said. My last question would be, looking at these three instruments that we have over there that you heard, we got the Prosper Colas, we got the Presenda, as well as the Joseph Galliano. You actually helped me pick these instruments. Why did you pick these three in particular? Because the condition is almost pretty much equal across the three of them, aren't they?
They are. So I picked them because I think they are very representative of instruments from the individual schools, and in this instance they are unadulterated by condition because they're all in very good condition. The schools of making in this instance, we have the semi-modern, one of the most important makers in Presenda, who is one of the first 19th century Italian makers to produce incredibly powerful Strad-like instruments. He cuts no corners, he is producing large concertizing instruments. This Galliano is just a particularly pristine, very beautifully presented, slightly over-polished, but characteristic example. You can see some small details that are quite fun, such as an F-hole on the treble side that almost swings out. This is something that he learned from Niccolo or copied. And in terms of the sound, I feel this also embodies a lot of what we would want in a Neapolitan violin, which is, at least to my ear, something which is quite strident, quite bright, and still colourful. They are instruments that you can imagine playing, concertos which are E-string dominant on, I would say.
And then here we got the Prosper Colas, which is of course on the opposite end of the spectrum in our price comparison today, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So again, Prosper Colas, more famous for bows, but a disciple of Violin, and here you have a very classical French Strad-inspired scroll with a very nice deep blackened chamfer, fabulously chosen wood, very, very precise workmanship. This is the kind of work that 100 years ago would have still taken quite a lot of effort. These days, I would say modern makers, most will be able to produce something like this. But 100 years ago, life was still a little bit hard. There was a slight sort of race to the bottom. So it's always nice to see an instrument from this period of time that has all the hallmarks of somebody who has been schooled and takes an enormous amount of pride in their work.
All right, thank you so much, Tom, for giving us the ultimate insight on these instruments. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
It really is amazing how every violin has its own personality. And while yes, there are some correlations between quality of sound to pricing, ultimately, every violin has its own qualities, and it really is a matter of what the player or the listener prefers. So that means, good news, you don't need to spend a fortune to find an instrument that really, really works for you. Ultimately, it is about finding the right balance between quality of sound, playability, and what you prefer in an instrument. I really encourage you to do more blind tests. Of course, a violin that is $10,000 cannot fairly be compared to a violin that is $1 million. But ultimately, playing more and more instruments will really add to your imagination and your education of your spectrum of color, if you will. That actually leads me to the end of the video. Let me know in the comments below if you actually want me to make a video on how to choose your violin when you're in a shop, because it can be extremely overwhelming and ultimately it shouldn't be as overwhelming. So thank you so much for watching today's video. Be sure to comment below and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.